send you. I'll do that after this.
Yeah, cool.
Just you can pick either one, but they'll both illustrate certain points in epistemology that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very fanciful language, so it's fine if you don't really get into it, but I'll point out the page that should have the important information.
All
I'll
right,
just
I'll
give you
try.
just a
I've
fragment.
tried to read him before, and yeah, I'll have another go. Um,
Yeah.
Question to you. I made a post about this, but no one replied. Like, um, if art is, and it's starting to make sense that it can be, if art's supposed to plays a role in the functioning of our minds, and it helps us embody, not embody, but like, put in concrete form an idea, then doesn't that mean I should be approaching it more actively? Meaning, like, if I'm reading a novel, like right now I'm reading another one called Shantaram, then shouldn't I be taking notes and like writing about it rather than just kind of sitting there and reading? And,
Mm,
more thinking rather than just like a passive kind of like, obviously you enjoy the experience. It's one aspect, but then maybe another aspect, the added aspect should be then like kind of working.
I think as far as fiction, I think a better way to take it in is to read it without notes first, but do another pass later with notes, because that way you can focus your mind on, say, going through the experience versus trying to concretize it all. Because I think it could take you out of focus on remembering the content. But I think, like, even studying nonfiction can be that way. Like, you do a quick pass one time, and then the second time you do all the notes. Now that once
Yeah.
you've gotten the context and understanding. I
Yeah.
guess that is a good question. Like, to what extent does note taking help? But I think, as far as trying to simulate why concretizing helps, I think it's better to go through it in a more natural way, sort of like how you go through your day to day. It's not like you always have a notebook out, take every note of everything you see, but I think it makes it more realistic. And then from there, you can write things down to make it more specific, more explicit.
Well, it's true you don't write thing every, like you're making a comparison to daily life, but the difference is that this is already abstracted away from daily life. So you're like one layer above already, um, with an art piece. So I get what you're saying about the experience. The only issue is that, with a nonfiction, I can skim through it. I can go to relevant sections. There's an index. There's a table of contents. Things are set up in paragraphs that are easy to like differentiate like what it's about. Whereas this is just one big flow. And so if I'm reading 1,000-page book, it's impossible for me. Like it gets to the point where I'm not going to read it again. Like I don't want to read it again,
Yeah, I guess what I
So
mean to say is then more like just like don't do it at the moment you're reading. Like finish a chapter, then do some notes.
yeah,
I
okay.
think it'd be better split up that way.
Yeah, but you
Like
don't do
just
anything like that, do you?
not usually, but
Mm.
maybe I should, but I've never really needed to. Just I'm not sure why that is, but I do think it would be right to take notes like after you read a chapter. I think that'd probably be the ideal way to do it if you want to be studious about what you want to get out of the piece of art.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know yet. Like, I guess it would be an experiment then, since
Yeah,
no one really got some thoughts
yeah,
from
but
you.
it
But
sounds like the right way of thinking about it.
okay. Another thing else, going back to these computer concepts, or like concepts that uh, do you say induce a concept?
Yeah, like
Like
when you
if you
form
get,
is like
yeah,
you're
form a concept.
inducing.
There's no difference in form and inducing, right?
Well, inducing doesn't isn't necessarily a concept. It could be just with propositions you're forming. It could be something else you're forming. But again, induction is arriving at new information that you didn't have before. So I mean, yeah, forming concepts is one way, or forming new propositions, or forming a new theory.
Okay. Um, So I'm just before the. I think I just got onto the abstractions from abstractions chapter in Ito,
Yeah.
and I was thinking like we sort of touched on this last time, but you can use a computer and then these are abstractions, but they're not necessarily abstractions from abstractions. Like just because it's complicated, like it's software, it depends on so many things. Like you might not see any of those relationships. I'm kind of like not stuck on that, but that's interesting to me that, yeah, there's obviously so many like there's so many things that having a window up on your screen depends on, but for you, it's as simple as software. And that's just a first level abstraction, if you can put it that way. You don't need to be conscious of anything else.
Yeah, I would say so. Like, I mean, that would imply like whatever psychological mechanisms that go on, like whatever your neurons do, like when the light goes into your eyes. I mean, of course, that affects some impact on what content you have to think about. But all that really matters is the content you do have.
Yeah. Okay.
You don't really need to say how it got into the exact form. Just that is the form it's in, and you could just work from there.
Okay. Let's see if we've got any other random questions. No, I reckon we could just go straight into. Do you want to go into Ito? Because I've made notes, and I feel like a lot of the questions that I've had about objectivity and reason, it's not that they'll get answered by going through it, but it'll. If I do ask a question, then I'll know, okay, I've already covered something that might be relevant, and I won't need to repeat stuff that's already answered in Ito, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, let me just order it really quick on Amazon. I was going to when
I've
you're
got
ready,
everything here
but
as well, like pasted. I've got all
okay.
the relevant quotes and sections pasted, which
Yeah,
let me.
but I've been meaning to get an ebook copy for a long time
Okay,
anyway.
all
So
right.
I've always had the physical one, which is where most of my notes are. Well, where I'm
I
used to
think
looking at it.
physical. I wanted to start buying more physical books, but it's some of them I have to ship everything from the States.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Oh,
Introduction.
actually, do you want to have a quick? Actually, I could. I haven't posted this yet, but I was preparing it, and I was gonna. Maybe I can get your thoughts on that before we go into Ito. Let me see if I
Yeah.
find it. Oh, and I found all these other random questions we can sort of get into with Ito as well. So let me go with this thing. We'll do one example. I'll copy paste it into a document and then I'll share it on the screen. It's in the shared folder I've got with you, but I will just share screen instead.
So I've got open. I've got my own copy now too. Because I've been wanting this. It's good to have the reference. The forward, skip that. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Okay,
You got it
so
too. Yeah.
I've got all my, I don't know if I've actually got random questions we can try work out a little bit and then I might get into Ito, but go with let's go with this first. This, can you see this clarification document I've got?
Yeah.
Just wondering
Yeah.
if you want to like go through like if you're using a certain concept in a proposition and you're like, that feels kind of vague, and you want to go through that process that was described in the role of philosophy um, lecture, that first part, the lecture one was role of philosophy from understanding objectivism, right?
Yeah.
Would you go through this process? It seems kind of like very painful and difficult and impossible almost, but this is all I figured out was like, okay, well, let's say I want to clarify the word thought. Like when I think of it, it's like kind of vague. I'm like, thought is a thing you do when you come up with ideas, or I'm like, I just feel vague about it. And so when I'm using it in a proposition, it's not clear. Would I then go, okay, I look up at that definition in the Oxford English thing, and then I add clarifying memorable examples or as close to as I can. And then I try identify genus and differentia, and then I combine that. Thought is selfish initiated mental activity directed towards making conceptual identifications
Hmm.
of perceptual or conceptual knowledge, or directed towards imagination. Is this sort of the process you follow for every single concept you're not clear on?
Mm, I mean, at least the genus differentia part, and that one's always the thing I found most useful. I mean, yeah, this is kind of the process.
But he also goes into like he says, if you want abstractions to have the same intensity of like a truck heading towards you, you need examples. And so that's why I sort of did this.
Yeah, if you want to, I think for a complete, thorough understanding, yeah, I mean, I would even do something like that if I'm trying to understand something in psychology. If I want to try to figure something out and really think it through, I probably would recommend going through a process like this. I think it has a lot to do with to what extent you feel confused. I don't think thought isn't usually something that people have too much trouble conceptualizing. But I agree you can concretize it like this. But the only question is how much work do you need to put into a concept? Because you could do that with thousands of concepts. It's more a matter of identifying which ones are the important ones to work on
Yeah.
initially. And thought might be one of the better ones, I think. Because if you're clear on what a thought is, as opposed to, say, an emotion or just like, say, something automatic, like you had a feeling within you, like a stomach ache, like, well, how is that not a thought? Like things like that. So I think that kind of concept is worth it, for example, at least
Well,
given what you've been trying to think on.
Well, it was for me more because it would come up and it seemed interchangeable with cognition, and it seemed strange that it was
Yes.
constantly. There didn't seem to be any pattern, and I was confused why someone who writes so precisely normally suddenly changing them all the time. And then
Yes.
I looked it up and I did clarify the difference, but it was only because I went through, you know,
Yeah.
um, yeah. But it'd be something like this, right? Definition, examples, then genus and differentia. Is that
Yeah. I think as a very structured way to do it, yes, I think so. I mean, I
okay?
think even in any subject, I would recommend that to someone. Like, at least for things that are already understood, you would start, oh, well, what's a thought? How should I think about this? Well, yeah, the first thing would be to look in a dictionary because somebody already thought about it. So you're trying to get an understanding of something somebody else already understood. It would be different if nobody thought about this before. Like if nobody thought about what is a thought as opposed to an emotion, then you would might do it slightly differently.
Yeah, right.
But as far as
But
understanding things, like understanding objectivism, which all the ideas are already there, this would be a more sensible way to do it.
would you say that for a lot of concepts, though, because if someone can't explain what something is, how do you know they understand it? Like if you ask a friend, you ask them what is understanding, and they can't give you a definition. They're like, oh, it's when you can use something. Do they understand the concept? Understand? Like just because what do you mean, you know what I'm saying, like
Yeah.
these are concepts that are in use, but how do you know you understand the concept? If you're basically, what I'm asking is, if someone can't explicitly explain to you what it is, and their way of explaining it is so broad and so vague, like it's when you can use something. Oh well, a hammer means if you, what is it like, when you can use something, like if you know how to use a hammer, you can understand how to use a hammer. I don't know. My point is, my point is, like, if someone gives you such a vague, or you yourself have a very vague, broad explanation of what it is, do you really understand it though? That's the, maybe you have the material, but doesn't mean you have you have the concept. Maybe you just have the material for the concept, but not the concept.
Yeah, that could be sometimes. It, of course, it's hard to tell, but usually, if it is vague, I would suggest, yeah, you don't understand it, but you need to be sure that, say, maybe you just need to, you never put it into words before necessarily. But I think I wouldn't say understanding is just an on or off thing. It's just the more you can explain it, the better understanding you have.
Got it.
That's how
Okay.
I would
Like,
think of it.
so you capture some characteristic of it, but not
Yeah.
not the whole thing. But in that case, it would mean you do grasp the concept, but you maybe haven't organized the information. Like, it's like you have a messy desktop with random files and
Yes.
they're not sorted out into. Okay.
I think that's an appropriate comparison. Yeah.
All right, cool. I will get rid of that then and
I
go
mean, a
into.
metaphor Rand uses is a file folder for concepts, and we can organize them better or worse. And if you're thinking clearly, it's just meaning that your concepts are organized well, that they're in a particular order, or that it's not as easy to access, things like that.
Right. What about like those examples I put down? It's hard to find memorable, like something that is actually emotional for a concept, and so you're just going to forget it anyway. Like, you're just kind of, if you just forget the examples anyway, or you constantly need to update them, it's not like you can actually maintain. At least as far as I'm aware, you're always maintaining a very explicit uh, understanding of every concept you have. It would seem to me impossible, and like even that was time consuming, right? I did that for other terms like
Yes.
cognition and learning and that, and I'm like, oh my god, how the hell do you do this for like? And it's not like, it's they are terms that I might be vague on. Like, I can't explicitly explain them, so I might ask questions that are based on that vague understanding. And it just seems like an impossibly difficult task to then go through that for every concept.
Yeah, I agree with you that, I mean, as you get more and more abstract, it gets more and more difficult to come up with anything concrete. And maybe at some level you just can't really, because it's just so abstract. And a part of it, I think, is how long you've been thinking about it. I think maybe you spent 10 years on something. What was once abstract starts to become more concrete and almost intuitive. I'm not sure you could say easily come up with an example for thought to get these emotional, concrete, hit you in the face representations. But I do think you can think of concrete reference, or at least you can, to help that, you think of explicitly what you're referring to. Like if you're talking about thoughts, just recall what it is you're referring to, what it is you're talking about, and think of that explicitly. Even if it's not trying to manage it really emotionally, as long as it's, you can think of what in reality it refers to.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and I mean, I guess the examples would constantly be updated. It's just a question of like the memorable examples would constantly be updated for each concept. So it's just can you hold the genus and differentiate in mind, which I don't know yet, but
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Like, I asked, does thought imply logic? And then once I clarified once I clarified thought, I'm like, well, no, it doesn't. Um, it can imply logic, but not necessarily. And there were
Yeah.
other questions like that I had that suddenly were like, well, just like we were talking about automatic reason, and I was like, well, okay, if reason is the volitional faculty, then there's no automatic reason. So it clarifies those confusions that you can get into, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think even once you do a concept like this, just thought, once you get the narrower concepts, it's much easier than it was coming up with thought, because probably by thinking about thought, you're able to making these distinctions, and you might say, well, like you're saying, some of it's logic, some of it's not. I mean, that's already a distinction within thinking. So you're already starting to break things apart in more distinct ways. And that's being helped by that initial thinking you did.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'll see as I keep doing that. But that one, I did like 4 terms and it took me like an hour. It was ridiculous. It took me over an hour. I was like, um, question for you about thought. When people say, like you're overcomplicating it, would you say that reduces to not thinking in essentials?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And same with like measuring efficiency or inefficiency of a thought process. What would you think is a measure of efficiency?
Mm, well, how much of it is in essentials is one way to think of that. Another way to think of it is, well, really, you're not going down dead ends as much, which again, I guess would be essentials. Are you thinking essentials or not? If it's efficient, you're saving time, really.
Yeah.
And if you
I,
save time, you could think about other things, and then you have more value in your life, I guess you could say.
so I just now had this thought. I guess there would be two aspects to it that I can think of. Tell me what you think. So one is a volitional and one is a non-volitional aspect. So the non-volitional would be like the speed at which you recall memories, your ability to remember. Um, and then there's probably more. And the volitional aspect would be the method. And so the efficiency is measured by the method, maybe.
Yes, I would focus on method as far as mental processes. Wait, are you talking about thought specifically being
Yeah,
some parts
thoughts.
volitional, some not?
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't it always be volitional? Like, isn't thought
Well,
distinguished that way?
if you ask, well, so what I'm thinking of, I'm saying, okay, if you ask yourself a question like, tell me a time when I ran in a park and got injured, or tell me about a time, like, can I think of a time where I felt this way? And it takes you a while versus someone who says, can you think of a time when you felt this way? And you instantly get flooded with examples. I would say that's, you
Yes.
know what I'm saying? Like there is some
Yes.
non-volitional difference
I'll
there.
agree with that. Yeah, I agree with
Yeah.
that.
I only got that from clarifying thought, as in the
Yes,
term.
that sounds accurate to me. Yeah.
Cool. And so we get to method as one measure of efficiency.
Yes.
Okay. And then, we're talking about intelligence, and there's debate in psychology, obviously, what intelligence is, but one view of intelligence is the ability to handle abstract concepts. Like so it's a kind of ability. Um, in that case, to improve the way you think by that measure would be to improve your intelligence. So it's a fluid. On that measure,
Yes.
it's a fluid ability, because if you improve your method, you improve the way you think is to improve your method. And so in a sense, you've got it seems like it might be quite a significant portion of it that's fluid.
Yeah, you would
Would
call
you?
that fluid intelligence. I mean, that is a concept they use within intelligence research.
Right.
Like fluid being more about more the methods of thought, but then as opposed to crystallized
Yeah.
intelligence, like it's just a baked in ability, like
Yeah.
maybe like
Like,
the speed in which you recall something. Or
yes,
maybe even like
you gave
facts that you
processing
know.
speed and geometric pattern recognition. You gave those examples last time.
Fluid being just that it can deal with many things. Crystallized means just like kind of just like what it is what it is. It doesn't really change.
Yeah.
And you can't really improve it too much.
Another question that came up, I still have to read your reply, but at what point can you say someone knows how to think well? Which it goes back to at what point, that same thing. I think I saw you put up a picture of a gradient, but I have to go through
Yeah.
that reply properly. If I included imagination in thought, but then so is daydreaming is a form of imagination, but is daydreaming, doesn't feel self-initiated. Sometimes if I drift, if I just let myself drift, like thoughts come up, but they're not self-initiated, and my differential was self-initiated. So I wonder if that's a bit contradictory. There's some catch there.
Well, I don't think so, because if self-initiated is really how you're distinguishing these things, then you would say that, say, daydreaming is lower on focus, like it's less focused than, say, when you choose to have a very high intense degree of focus.
Okay, got it.
So the
Uh,
measure that changes is that degree of focus.
uh-huh. Right. I think this goes back to I'm thinking about it as a 1 or 0, meaning you're either in focus or non-focus. But I think you a while ago you also mentioned that it's like a gradient where there's different levels of focus. To like complete non-focus might be like dead, whereas but if I'm alive and just because I'm drifting doesn't mean I'm not in focus at all. Right. That's sort of
Yeah,
what you're.
you have like some focus
Yeah. Okay.
versus
But
more when
then
you're like trying to be like, say, when you're taking a test, you'll probably be more in focus than otherwise.
but it's still actually but it's still the issue is still there in that like I'm in focus. Like if something comes up I might pay attention and initiate thought, but when I'm drifting I don't know if I don't feel like that's initiated. Or like let's say I'm sitting down and I'm meditating and thoughts come into my mind, I don't get the sense of like initiating that, you know what I'm saying? Like I just feel like the thoughts come up, but then I've put the differentiate as um initiate self-initiated. That Yeah.
Um,
I
yeah,
gotta write that down. That seems to me like there's something wrong with the way I did it.
yeah. I mean, I like the sound of the volitional, but you're right about, you're still referring to things that pop in your head. It's usually the things you can think about volitionally, or you can pursue volitionally, like something to that effect. Like it's the content you're aware of that you can direct.
Um, well, maybe there's. Do you think that it may be the case that there's two different concepts with the same word, meaning you can use thought to refer to self-initiated mental activity, or thought to refer to just, I guess mental activity. Like mental activity is the genus. What other kinds of mental? Oh, there's emotions, but do you think it might be a case of like the concept is, there's different concepts in the same word? Because
It might be. I'm not really sure about that,
okay,
but I would say still that a lot of it's to do with the mental content that you can direct. That's usually how I think of it.
content and action. I remember reading that somewhere in Ito. That all
Yes.
concepts of consciousness are uh, their fundamental characteristics of content and action. I don't know how someone figures that out. It's insane, but it's not at all
Yeah.
obvious to me. So, but yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, she never even wrote it until she was like 60 something anyway. So I think so.
Yeah.
She's got so many years to think about it.
Um, Well, that's good news for me. Let me go to something else because it would be good to cover this too. Try fit it in. And I got all these random questions here with the. Let's see. Um, with thought, do you think? I think I asked you this last time, but it's either the only two examples I can think of where you get stuck in a thought is you have ignorance because you're asking your subconscious a question and you're not getting an answer, or there's some contradiction that's causing the something to jam. Oh, and then a third one would be you just don't your memory. You've got issues with the memory. So that's three reasons you might get stuck. Can you think of which? I would say not recalling a memory is basically falls under ignorance. So ignorance and contradiction. Would there be anything else that you can think of that
Um,
you get stuck in a thought process?
just the people to think about this. So yeah, you're right about memory. Like you want to recall something that would give you the answer and you just can't. Like when that tip of the tongue, like you know the answer but it won't come out. Um, you're right. And get contradiction, yes. Um, I guess distractions. I'm not sure if those would really count. It's not like you're stuck in the thought as much as the thought was interrupted if you get
Yeah.
um, a distraction. Um, but to block you from going forward, or yeah, like ignorance could also just include unknown information that you know you need but don't have yet, and so you know you can't proceed until say you get the result of an experiment, for
Which you
example.
could put memory under that, I think, like
Yes, you could.
inability to recall the proper. But it's kind of weird because there is a distinction there too.
Yes.
Okay. Um, oh, well, I guess this sort of fits into what your research interest is, which is like optimizing memory through concepts as well. And
Yes.
like, because that was my next question, but we'll skip it because we'll get into that another time.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. Um, yeah, so we're sort of in agreement there then on the way you get stuck in a thought process is ignorance and contradiction.
Hmm.
Um, is integration a form of generalization?
I mean, I would say so because you're putting like say two things into one, so it is more general, and I think by definition that's a generalization.
Right. And then, okay. Now I was curious to explore overgeneralization, but I could probably find that in any logic text. So I'll just pull that and look at it later.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see what else I got here. So this is the part where he talks about maybe I can paste it in this window that I'm sharing and you'll see what
Mhm.
um, that. Can you see it?
Yes. Is this from Opar?
Opar. It is.
Yeah, I remember this.
Yeah.
There can be no course of
Okay. So this makes sense. Like just because something um, is represented in form doesn't mean it has the substance. You know, in this case, 2 + 2 equals 4. If a parrot says it, doesn't mean it has the actual knowledge of
mm-hmm.
what that is and what the implications of it are. And I was thinking like, I'm still not fully clear on this, but because there are a lot of concepts I'm not clear on, isn't a lot of the way actually, I just remembered she actually answers this in one of the second Ido chapter that I was reading, which goes exactly to this. I was going to ask, like, isn't a lot of the way we form concepts or a lot of people form concepts is this associative method? Like, there's not, it's like just based off, let me close this thing that's in the way. It's just based off associations a lot of the time. Oh, a lot of concepts, not all of them. And if you're not clear on it, then chances are you based it off association. Would you say that sounds?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that is the case a lot of the time. It's hard to say exactly where. It depends a lot on the education system and how like what education environment the kid was in and whatnot. It could depend. But I think yes, a lot of the time that in like public education, I think that is the case a lot. Like they know how to say it and what it is, and but their understanding is so minimal that it doesn't. It's not much more than just repeating some random words.
Can you think of any example concepts? I just found the exact relevant. I only read this right before today, and this is unrelated. I found this, which speaks to what Peikoff was saying. But can you think of any example concepts that are commonly like? I'm thinking on my own. Like, I wonder if, I can't. At least I can't. It's hard to recall. If I've ever given this much thought to what thought is. But I think I've just kind of like I haven't gone through a process of sitting there and going, okay, is it this? Is it that? What about this? It's more like, oh, thought is that thing you do when you do maths, or like thought is I sort of get it. And then there's some association in there. There's some questioning, but a lot of my concepts I think are like that, where I'm just, um, yeah,
I
I
think
think
in
that,
math, I was especially like that. Like I could get by in school, but I never understood. I never believed I really understood. Just like I can do what you say, but I don't really get it. And I never felt
mm,
like that's an example. Maybe like your education not being done thorough enough or well enough or clear enough, and not helping my thinking. Rather, they hindered it, if anything, or made it irrelevant to me, which was unfortunate.
I don't I don't know if maths is a good example though, because I feel like I'm not sure about this, but I had the experience that I hated it because it all just seemed so arbitrary. We start with these and these rules, and then you just do this. Why? What for? Like, what do you need any of this for? It's all just random examples. Like, if you want to, they just seem so useless. Or they'll just start with a lot of like arbitrary formulas. They are you at least in your experience they're arbitrary, and no one will tell you what it is, and you feel like you don't understand any of it because you're just starting from all these random points. That was my experience in school.
Well, that is
So,
basically what I mean. That kind of experience is teaching it wrong.
okay. And then it is just memorizing and associating.
Yeah, at that point, it's really if it's just arbitrary and they don't really explain well the relevance or the importance or why it matters, then it will just end up as association because you can't really create any more meaning other than saying this is the fact, repeat it, and that's it. It
Right.
has no meaning. Like, but now that I'm much
Um,
older and I've studied some math, like I've started to like it at least a little bit, but it doesn't feel as arbitrary anymore.
right. Right. Um, yeah. I mean, if you approach it in a thoughtful way and you ask questions, but I got thinking about this whole topic a lot because it's like I have not, when I was very young, I remember asking tons and tons of questions all the time, and then at some point that stopped, and I was like, I guess I can't. And then I now started asking heaps of questions again, and I'm like, I guess this is what thinking is. You're asking tons of clarifications. This is what she's talking about, but then so many of the concepts from like a very young age to later for me and probably for a lot of people seem to be like this. Um, I gave the example of talking to a friend and asking her what understanding was, which I didn't give much thought to before. And she was like, it's when you know something. And it was kind of like, we didn't get into too many, I guess you need to get into examples, but I was thinking like, well, if you have concepts that are, do you think that if the concepts, do you think you can forget the explicit
Sorry, one second.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
All right, cool. Do you think that if you don't have the explicit formulation of the concept, let's say do you think, I mean, let me just think of how I want to word this. You don't have the explicit formulation of the concept. Does that mean you understand it? Like, is it possible you explicitly formulate it, you think about it, but then you just forget the explicit formulation?
I think that's possible. I don't see why it wouldn't be possible. I mean, you could say you don't understand it as well as you used to, possibly, if
Yeah,
you can't reproduce it.
maybe I'll write that down as a question to ask.
I mean, I would say there is some amount of maintenance that's necessary.
Yeah, okay. Time, right? Do you think spaced repetition has a role to play in that kind of thing? Like if we're thinking about optimization through technology.
Yeah, at least when you're learning, you
Yeah.
don't want to just throw it all in initially, but if you've already developed an understanding, you would need a lot less time to refresh your memory, a lot less time to refresh.
Right. Um, yeah, okay. So you could have an explicit formulation you put in thought, but you just forget the explicit formulation of the thing. So to actually work out if you understand something, then it would be not a matter of asking someone for an explicit formulation, but seeing what their examples are of thought. Do you think that would be better?
I guess a little bit of both. Like we've been saying, it's not like an absolute measurement, I think. I would say you could say that they probably have the concept, but maybe they're, like I used about the balloon, it's just not filled very much. You could put it that way sometimes. Like if they just have that very basic bare thing, you might say they have the concept, but they didn't induce very much.
Yeah. Although if they don't, if they, I don't know, because I guess, you gave the example of the balloon. The way I visualized it is that, yeah, maybe in terms of intensity, that would correspond to the size of the balloon. But if you're talking about
Yes.
having the concept, you're talking about fine distinctions between the balloon and the sky and everything else.
Yeah.
Whereas you can have, I don't know if you, yeah, I guess it goes back to your reply. At what point do you have something, like this measurement of being on a gradient? This theme comes up over and over for me. So it would be good for me to go through that and clarify it for myself.
Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with measurement omission that Rand talks about. That's the measurement you emit, but whatever you emit it from, it still exists in some intensity,
Right.
meaning that had to be on a continuum, like from 0 to 1,000, whatever it is. And
Yeah.
you just go from there.
Let's see. So this is from Ito.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So this seems to be. Yeah. Anyway, this is definitely my experience of not. You to then to treat words as concepts then would have meant like I'm asking the amount of questions earlier on in school as I am now. Like, what is this? What about in this case? What about in that case? What does this mean? How does this work? Like a million questions. That's what would be captured by this, right? The understanding she's talking about. And then the road to approximations is I kind of know what I mean, which actually characterizes a lot of my concepts when I, not the basic ones, but I mean like more abstract concepts, especially when you get into philosophy. Um, so to avoid that, it would just be asking tons of questions, right?
A big part of it, I think so.
Yeah. And then this goes to your substituting, memorizing for understanding, goes to your point about maths.
I
All
was
right,
thinking
cool.
about this the other day too, with regard to like learning and what you said about people who are a fan of Aristotle seem to be very clear about the way they explain things.
Yes.
And so I don't know if you know Masterclass. It's a subscription service online. It gives like these high quality professionals. They explain how to do something on some subject.
Yeah.
And I was watching one about baking bread. And the way she explained things was a level of clarity I don't often find even among the other chefs I see on Masterclass or whatever search it is. And the way she went about it was a lot about some just very basic concepts and even beginning with your senses. Like she was saying, if you want to understand bread baking well, you got to use your senses. Like hit the bread and see what it sounds like, smell the bread, um, touch the bread, everything about it. And she's talking about these other
Interesting.
distinctions,
Cool.
like simple categories of things just to think about, like simple definitions, but it makes it easier to think about once about those other more complex things she gets into. She starts to talk about like how do you make sourdough? And it's like a lot going on, but it helps that you've had these other concepts introduced and these other thoughts just starting simple with what's in front of you, simple definitions and what you perceive in building from there. And it made me think about how, I mean, true, asking a lot of questions helps, but sometimes it's also focusing on these perceptual level things that to begin your thinking before jumping right into like, how do you make the best piece of rye bread ever? Like, you really got to start at the very basics. Like, what is bread? What do you put in bread? What does bread smell like? Like, very basic things. It doesn't matter how advanced, how old you are. That's really where you begin. You got to begin with something either simple or direct, or even ideas that would seem almost like stupid questions that even a child should know, but nevertheless, that's where you begin.
That's interesting. So that you're making almost a case for, I actually made notes on that kind of thing. Let me see if I can find I pasted some random things that relate to it. Here we go. So I've actually got another thing. I was preparing a write-up called Logical versus Chronological Study. And here's one of the things I pasted in. This one. And he talks about how like you get it from reality first, from percepts. You have to observe things. Although it's obviously one thing to say that. The question is then application, which from what I understood is in understanding objectivism. Yeah, but that's relevant to what you're saying. It's like you have to start with the percept. We live in the world of, it's easy to get caught up in like abstractions, right? And you're like, this is the world, and because I think a lot and all that kind of thing, and you're just caught in that world. But the reality is out there in the everything in front of you, like the bread, smell, taste, engaging our senses makes the concepts more real.
Yeah. Oh, and to mention the other people who are fans of Aristotle, I did the other masterclass that I love is like there's quite a few of them, but the one I especially love is on screenwriting by Aaron Sorkin. He's a well-known screenwriter, but like he wrote like a few good men, like you can't handle the truth. He wrote that line, and anyway, he gives kind of this similar, very clear about what concepts to deal with, like action, plot, characterization. He talks about, even if you're kind of familiar with it. It's for him to teach you what he knows, he clearly likes to begin with these clear, simple definitions and build from there without trying to be too fancy with his definitions. And he even mentions Aristotle specifically. He says he's a big fan of Aristotle's Poetics
Oh,
as a way to
interesting.
think about plot and characterization. So he's a fan of Aristotle. Like, I had no idea he would have. Like, I knew about him before, but it's like I would have never guessed. But once you
Yeah,
mention like this clarity, this way of thinking, it is kind of Aristotelian, and he literally got it from Aristotle. So
that's super
it's pretty
interesting.
interesting.
Can you send me the name of this guy again? What's his name?
Aaron Sorkin.
Aaron Sorkin. I
Yeah,
write it down somewhere.
yeah, he's pretty well known.
Because yeah, like I said last time, I did notice it's not one, it's like two, well, I think two, probably more, that I've read their books and I'm like, what, how is this person write so clearly as well? And I keep finding they're really like Aristotle. So not coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
let's see. Okay, this question isn't clear to me, so I'll have to come back to it another time. But we can go into this while we still have time. So I also did this, like I said, did this thing that I showed you before for thought for a few words. And the reason was because of this, it pissed me off, this cognition. I didn't understand the difference. I was like, why are you using thought and cognition? Why not just thought? And turns out cognition is obsolete except in philosophy, where it's actually, it lets you make a more sharper, from what I'm getting, it actually just lets you make a sharper distinction between thought and the other parts of your mental faculty, not including emotion. So it includes sensation, perception, conception, and then it lets you put that, you sometimes want to, you're going to use more of, you're going to refer to that more in philosophy. And so that's why it's in philosophy, it's used. Anyway, so I got this, and I try to go, okay, includes everything in the thought example, but more. Dwelling on the past. Well, I think that's a thought as well. Sensing the dull pain of a bruise, perceiving the sun setting up over the opera house. And then so I could put these examples and they include everything in the one I did before. And then I was like, okay, well, Janus mental activity, differentiate perception of reality through senses and concepts.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking like, well, first of all, what do you think of this?
The perception. Let's see. I just don't like the word perception.
Me
I
neither.
would usually say awareness.
Awareness
Like
through awareness, so not of reality, because, well, you gotta have
like
awareness
awareness
of.
of reality through senses or concepts sounds better because awareness seems more general than perception.
Got it.
Like you can be aware of a concept as you don't perceive concepts, but you're aware of them.
Yes.
And
Um,
it could help you get a handle on reality. So I think awareness is appropriate.
my issue was that, are you aware of reality if you're dwelling on the past, or are you aware of reality if you have an illogical thought? Like that, because that's included in at least my understanding of cognition. I'm like, well, that doesn't. How can that be that you're then aware? How can the differentiator then be awareness of reality if you, because a thought can include an illogical one? I understand, you're sensing a dull pain as a wellness, like anything perceptual is an awareness of reality, but awareness of a concept of reality might through, or awareness of reality is not guaranteed through concepts. So what are your thoughts on
I
like,
think I just did the two definition thing. I was thinking more in the normative sense in psychology that cognition would be like successfully doing these things. But just
oh, okay,
simply cognition, I guess you could say it's like just awareness through senses or concepts. Of reality, I guess that depends on what way you think of it explicitly, what you're looking at, whether you're like aware you're hallucinating or something, or aware that you're dreaming. But you can
I'm gonna,
be aware of like the facts or aware of certain things. So aware of awareness through senses or concepts.
I will put that up, hopefully get some more feedback on that at some point. So cool. um and then let's see what else I was.
But then again, I mean, hallucinations do occur, and you could say that's still awareness, and there's nothing wrong with you. But you could say it's just, I think, just strictly awareness through senses or concepts is best. And then if it's working well, then it's of reality. But if something's off or something's inappropriate, it's going to be something else.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Like if it's not awareness, like awareness through senses could either be reality or something else,
Oh,
like
right.
hallucinations.
Hallucination. Yeah. The other issue I had is, yeah, he uses, I remembered later he used the term emotions are not tools of cognition. And I was like, well, not, uh, well, I guess thought is a tool of cognition in a certain case. But I was like, not all, at least in my current explicit trying to put together what cognition and cognition is, I was like, well, not all cognition is perception of reality, like you gave the example of. But then so how can, I was just confused by then he's saying emotions are not tools of cognition, and if I understood cognition correctly. But you said something about normative, which I sort of get, which is like you're saying you're supposed to mean that it is perception of reality or something like that.
Yeah, if it's working correctly, like it ought to do this.
Okay, so you make the, okay, all right. I mean,
I
it's straightforward enough. I understand what he means. Emotions are not tools of cognition. Of course, I know he means like do not actually necessarily reflect reality. But I was just trying to fit that in with my understanding of when I was trying to explicitly define cognition, because it didn't fit.
Another way to think of it, I mean, that definition would be fine to me that we talked about, but on Wikipedia it just uses the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experience, and the senses, which is can be pretty broad, but I think it's just capturing that it's more like knowledge as opposed to say feelings and intuitions,
Right. Yeah.
or
Okay.
just any mental action you use to acquire knowledge, which I guess you could say emotions can play a role. Not that they determine any answer, but it can get tricky there. But cognition, I think, just generally refers to the process of acquiring knowledge. That usually makes more sense. And you could say that that implies awareness of, through your concepts and senses, but maybe that depends on your specific theory. But just in general, if you talk to anybody, they would, I'm sure they'd understand like a process of acquiring knowledge through thought, experience, and senses.
Yeah. This was
And you
the
say, let's,
obsolete definition. And then it goes to, I guess some of that is carried over into the philosophical context. It seems like it's only
yeah,
used in a philosophical context.
yeah.
So
Philosophy and psychology is the only places I've seen it used.
yeah, it makes sense because I think you're using it to help make additional distinctions between thoughts
Yes.
and other things, which in day to day you just don't need. Like you're not gonna say, oh, was it a thought or a cognition? Like just doesn't come up.
Yeah, it's not really relevant outside that.
Yeah. Okay. What else did I want to ask you? Um, I forgot. I had one more small thing. I don't know. I can't remember now. I forgot.